was, in the beginning, it was the most exciting experience of my life because it was a group of women helping women. And all the way, like accompanying them to family court, going to social services with them, helping them enroll their kids in school. It was fully comprehensive.
Then we moved into the Roadhouse, which was down from family of Woodstock. Then we opened up the first domestic violence shelter between Yonkers and Albany in 1980. And the reason we opened it was because in the late 70s, people would congregate at family of Woodstock to go to this shelter that we had created down the street, the Roadhouse. And if you went into family of Woodstock in like 1978, it would be filled at 9:45 with women and children. And we said, what the hell is that about? And that was really the first time we got immersed in domestic violence. I mean, we took calls over the phone, but it was very different to see 10, 12, 15 people sitting in a waiting room to go to an emergency shelter.
There's one story for me that always sticks out, and that was a woman that I worked with. She had 3 kids also, and she lived out near Shandaken, which was pretty isolated area at the time. Her husband was very abusive. She and her kids, who were a similar age to mine, came into the shelter. She had been abused for a number of years. She was out. The kids came home from school and saw a trail of blood in their house and just knew that it was their mom. The older daughter, who was about 13 at the time, followed the trail out the back of the house, and it was their pet dog that had been killed and hanging from a tree, and there was a note on the animal directed to their mom. So when they called their mom, and she rushed home from work, and she comes in and she sees this and she needs this note, and she makes the phone call, calls us, grabs the kids, and that she grabbed the kids and went to a diner or somewhere, which is often what would happen, and came to us.
Statistically, it's like it happens at least once in half of all relationships, and in 20% it's ongoing and severe. Now, the statistics may have changed. I don't think they could be that different.
You pack a very small bag and then you have to hide it. And you have to wait for the moment when you're safe to take your children and leave. And a woman who arrives in the middle of the night with 3 children, one of whom is 4 months old, without anything, no diaper bag, no milk, no nothing, and how at a shelter you have to have everything available to reproduce some semblance of something for these people who have no clothes, no money, no support, whose parents have said you should have stayed in the situation, he's the money earner, and it has to be a secret where they are.
You lose everything, and I think people should understand that is the kind of loss. We're looking now at people who are being airlifted out of places like Afghanistan, who are going into a complete unknown with whatever they have gathered in a bag, maybe a suitcase. Well, that was what, so people see that vision of a refugee. Well, that was who we saw every day. Women who were coming in with their child, their children, their belongings. Maybe they had a suitcase, but maybe they didn't even have time to find the suitcase, and they just threw whatever they could in a paper bag or a garbage bag or whatever. And for the most part came in knowing that or either knowing or finding out that they would never return to that community, that neighborhood, that school, that job. And how devastating that is.
One of the main reason women left at all was if a man threatened their children. It was the point at which a man would hurt a woman with her baby in her arms, or he would hit a child, or that was the cutoff. So, and women showed up at the door of the shelter, which was a secret place, right? Day and night.
As a hotline person, we started to get calls from women who were being abused by their partners, husbands, etc. And so we decided that we had to do something about it, and that's how family was. There was no shelter. There was nothing that really saved them and protected them from the ongoing violence of the abuser. When we started to get calls on the hotline from women who had been battered, we used the Roadhouse as a housing facility for them and for their kids. So there were times that we had 30 people staying there. Kids were sleeping on the floor. People were sharing rooms. What happened was when we started to get these phone calls from battered women, that then, I mean, in those days, there was a committee for everything. So we formed a battered women's committee. And it was easy to get people to help because most of the people that were involved were formerly battered women. And then we all got trained on getting an order of protection, emergency assistance to families. And so what we were able to do was to get them help through the legal system, DSS, and then we also helped them to find housing. So while this was going on, the guy that was the head of Ulster County Mental Health, Jerry Landsberg, had said to us, I'll help you if you want to get something together. So there was we had a big meeting at the senior residence at Benedictine Hospital. And I had a panel with the DA, a family court judge, somebody from social services, people from family. And what it did was it created a documented need that we needed a shelter for battered women. And we proceeded Dutchess County. They came, Grace Smith House, which is the shelter in Dutchess County. They came to meet with us. There was a Safe Homes project also in Dutchess County. They came to meet with us, and then programs started to spring up around the state once people saw how dire the situation really was. So I went in with this woman right before Christmas to get an order of protection. And he looks at the woman and he looks at me and he says, what are you doing at the battered women's shelter? It's Christmas time. You should be home with your husband and your family. Could you believe that? When we first got started, when I went into family court, they had never given out orders of protection.
Important to remember that at that point in history, no one talked about domestic violence. We would say, and I often said this publicly, I remember seeing women in supermarkets with black eyes and never registering how they got it. It was something that was not only not discussed, but the police paid no attention to it. No one was ever chastised, arrested. So a domestic violence shelter at that time was unheard of. My first experience with domestic violence was, now that I think back to it, my sister was a really suburban bourgeois housewife. And her friend called one day and admitted to being abused by her husband. Now, she had been a family friend for years and years and years. And my sister and I went to her apartment and saved her. And I remember the first thing she said when she opened the door, battered and bruised as she was, "Oh, I'm sorry, I don't have any cake to offer you with tea." And that was the situation within which the shelter was designed. And when my sister and I went to the police in New Jersey, they tried to convince us not to get involved, that we should leave this as a private matter between this woman and her husband. And when she started describing to us what she experienced, how this man had so horribly abused her in the light of day. I mean, we all saw, but no one saw. He was very careful never to hit her where she could show her face. And she was just humiliated and ashamed and could never admit it. And so when I joined the shelter, it was with that experience that I had had personally that I knew what happens.
That's how it was in those days. I mean, I also was asked to give a talk at the Ulster County Magistrates Association. So the magistrates are the people that are the judges in the local courts. So I go to a meeting. It was at some restaurant in Kingston. They didn't invite me to come for dinner. They invited me to come after I get there. They were sloshed, all of them. And and I mean, what can you do? I mean, I'm doing my talk and they're making jokes. It was really, really horrible. They made fun of everything. I only beat my wife if she, and then name it, didn't have dinner done, didn't iron my clothes. I mean, it was so ludicrous. I mean, it's almost like a Saturday Night Live sketch. But there I was living, and I was very young at the time, and it was kind of hard to take that and go on. I mean, they obviously thought I was really funny and didn't take it seriously. And now there's such a major turnaround with consciousness. It's incredible.
It was the police, it was the DA, it was the judges. All of these people wanted us to just shut up. We were trouble. And you had to withstand that. That was difficult. And what I remember mostly was the resistance. We would tell women to call the police, and then the police wouldn't come. Gradually, little by little, we were changing it. And it took courage, imagination, fortitude, stick-to-itiveness.
We had one person who worked with the kids, and she would sit and talk to them and play with them and do all that kind of stuff. And she was kind of like the liaison to the George Washington School, which was the elementary school in the district of the shelter. And so, like, any issues with the kids she dealt with. And if the women were going to court or to social services or other appointments, most of the time she would help with the kids, or one of the other women at the shelter would help with the kids. I mean, it was really like a community, which I think is very important to note.
Initially, when shelter started, the focus is what do these moms need, or these women, and we realized that these women, for the most part, were moms, and so taking care of their needs also meant we had to look at and address the needs of the kids. These are kids who are coming in who have had a secret. The secret was what was going on in their family, and then they leave that situation and they come into another situation where they have a secret, and the secret is you can't tell anybody where you live, or, you know, and that was really hard to help kids. You know, they're going to a neighborhood school, but they can't make connections because they can't walk home with the kid. You know, it was really a serious issue in terms of helping kids negotiate all of that. After school activities, you know, you might have been Girl Scouts, Boy Scouts, those things all change. You know, it was really challenging to have, so we had to create that community for the kids at the shelter. You know, there was a period where we had our own small little Girl Scout group going on because, you know, we had several kids who had been Girl Scouts who were now detached from their troops, and they had been working on projects leading to badges and that kind of thing. And so we just reached out, got a volunteer who was a Girl Scout troop leader who said, you know, I mean, we had like 3 or 4 girls, but that was good, and it kept them in the game. So once they left, they could reconnect with the troop and not feel like they had fallen behind.
The other thing that we did through the coalition is we got together with other shelters that were developing in New York State and worked with them to find ways to, you know, how do you do this? How do you do that? It was all like we were all learning it. You know, now everything is it's so different. But in those days, it was really women helping women, programs helping programs.
It is about sharing what we have so that everyone's not reinventing the wheel. You know, I'm working with a group of kids that have this particular issue going on. Rather than having to, you know, turn myself inside out in terms of trying to figure it out, I could reach out to a network of folks and say, has anyone ever had this experience? How did you deal with it, etc.? You know, a prime example was I was working with, at one point I had two young kids. One was 5 and one was 7 who were suicidal, actively suicidal. Now that was an experience that I had never had. And I had talked to a couple of local therapists and who were sensitive to the issue, but they were concerned about their work, their behavioral work in relationship to the trauma that the kids had experienced as living in homes where there was severe violence in both of these situations. So I reached out to my network. I got some input and connections to other mental health professionals out of state that I could hook up the folks I knew, the therapists in my county with. And it was a win-win for us and for the children that we were working with. So we had this really broad network that served as a training tool, a learning tool, information sharing. It was great.
Everybody was active in work, like meeting with the women, going with them to family court to get an order of protection, taking them to social services, helping them look for housing. I mean, it was like all encompassing. And people, women, particularly those who had been battered themselves, were so eager and excited to help. If you're working with battered women, it's really a social justice issue, because it's not only a question that the woman needs help, a crime has been committed against her, so you have that component. She's left with only the clothes on her back, so she has no money. The kids need to go to school.
The rule was you went to college, you found a husband, you got married. Now this is middle class stuff, of course. You got married, you had children, and someone took care of you, and that was the dream. And to realize that letting someone take care of you was dangerous, really dangerous. because should anything ever happen, you couldn't take care of yourself. And it happened over and over and over. And the divorce laws supported it, so women were left penniless and yet having to take care of their children. All of that is part of the women's movement. We analyzed all of that. It was a society. And for us, it was all revelation. I would say 1969, our first consciousness raising groups. And we didn't know what we were doing. All we knew is that we were going to get together and talk. The groundwork was laid for it. The skills of how to do this the groundwork was laid in the women's movement. The groups that we ran at the shelter were phenomenal experiences. We had a group room, and we ran these groups for women to describe and to support each other. And sometimes it was the first time that women told each other the story. And this is a replica of consciousness raising in the women's movement, because that's the way the women's movement started, where women got together and they told each other their stories. And it was the first time that women did that with each other. The group room at the shelter is a replica of that, where women described their experiences to each other for the first time.
I taught a course at SUNY New Paltz on violence against women, and one of the things I did was I had a slideshow of record albums that showed women either in bondage or being abused. And these are all things that are part of our culture that we go, okay, but we were throwing all of that stuff out in the open and made the connection between battering of women and pornography and S&M sex. I mean, we did all of that stuff, and also looked at incest as another form of family violence. And we oftentimes had women who were placed at the shelter in order to protect their kids. It's not about people. It's about a culture that allows men to be violent against women.
It was a mission. It was an ethos. It was a culture. We were, ready to help, ready to, be available, and ready to be out, thinking outside the lines, outside the box. I mean, people at 5 o'clock, at 5:05, they still need help. You can't just close down. We never close down. I mean, 24/7 is a pretty strong commitment.
And the people that were working with me that I told you about, that wrote the booklet, that took women to court, took them to social services, these were all people that were volunteers at family that were interested in this issue. And because we had Family House, which came first, that was kind of like a model for how it could work. Because Family House, which is what Eric did, was for runaway and homeless youth. And most of them got services and help because they called the hotline. And so this was the same thing with battered women.
You did your training at family. You did your listening skills, et cetera, at family. It was the way you did it. You couldn't arrive in town and not do your stint on the hotline. Everyone who came to town took a family training. And as I say, I met my best friend in Woodstock in a family training.
We had formed a battered women's committee through family, and we met on a regular basis. And if a woman came in that we were then housing at the Roadhouse, one of us from the committee would meet with them and work with them. Try to do is to have battered women be in the leadership role on the committee so that there would be empathy and understanding between the battered woman who was calling us and the woman who met with her. we saw something that needed to be done, and we made it happen. And at the time, this is 1980, it was way less bureaucratic than the way the world is now. So, and it also gave us a sense of community, all of us working together to a common goal. And what we tried to do, and it happened many times, was we tried to have some of the women at the shelter come with us when we did public speaking. I mean, our theory was always battered women are the experts. They know the situation, they've been through it, and the rest of us should be helping to give them the leadership role in the battered women's movement. And that's what happened with Gwen Wright.
And it was about empowering women, recognizing that these were women who, for the most part, and myself included, had very little control over their lives prior to leaving an abusive a relationship where there was abuse. And so part of our job was to help them to really see themselves as significant, functioning, competent individuals, that they can take control of their lives and move forward. And I think that again, one of the things that family did well, and I'm an example of that, is utilizing the experience of clients to help other clients. You know, there's nothing like hearing from someone their real life experience as a motivator for you to rethink your own life. And they did that across their programs. It wasn't just the domestic violence program. It was in their substance use programs. It was in their homeless housing programs, their HIV program, all of their programs. Really, I think family had a strong commitment to creating pathways for clients who wanted to join in the work.
I have to say a word about Michael Berg, because this, in many ways, all of this is a tribute to him. And he always knew what the right thing to do is. And he was very supportive. And he knew how to get people to help him. He never gave up. I mean, really, he supported the shelter, wrote the grants when there was time, and we could write grants, and there were people who would imagine giving us a few bucks here and there, and who needed family, and supported the Batterers program endlessly. It's really a tribute to Michael that he had the foresight and the imagination and the skill to support family and these programs. We transformed Ulster County. And it was Michael's spirit. You know, you needed someone who would back you up.
I think the whole concept of calling it family, it's what I said to you earlier, it was people, helping each other, and everybody was connected and friends.
A few years into it, one of the things that we realized was that unless we helped the men, nothing was going to change, because all we were going to do was get women out of the situation, and women always wanted to go home. So over and over and over, we would help women and they would go back. And so also very early on at the shelter, we realized this. And there was no one really, and there was a huge split between shelters run by feminists and people who wanted to help batterers, men. Yet, I at that time was also working in conflict resolution. I had several different interests. And I felt that it should come out of the shelter. I was at a presentation once about the Batterers program, and in front of me was a man named Jay Sadowitz, and Jay and I talked afterwards, and we realized that the time for a Batterers program was upon us, that we had to act. And so Jay and I worked together to design a Batterers program, but it came out of the shelter. And it caused a lot of waves of consternation in the women's movement because there was such a division. Jay ran the flower shop. Nancy Kafka, who was my childhood friend, ran the lingerie store in Woodstock. Hillary Sanders was a resident of Woodstock. She's now married to Billy McKenna, the town supervisor in Woodstock. And we ran a Batterers program. At that point, it wasn't out of a court system. It was just out of family. We would interview men and we would sign them up for this program. We educated ourselves. We read, we talked, we met every week. We educated ourselves on who these people are, friends, neighbors, family, and how to really reach them. Because as you say, these weren't necessarily volunteer in the beginning. We had no power. They weren't mandated. It has become a mandated program. What we were learning is that now it goes without saying, but at that point, men who hit out of frustration have had this in their history. Mm-hmm. The anger and the rage and the frustration and the permission that men gave themselves to hurt people who were weaker than that they are in secret. That's a very important part of this because it was in the house. Was in the home. So these men could be the nicest men out in public, right? The people who help their neighbors and the sweetest men, but they would go home and they had given themselves permission really to run a prison. That was the Wild West. And family was on the cutting edge again, first with the shelter and then with the Batterers program. And so that really was the genesis of what has become across this country a men's movement. Because eventually men started helping men. You know, it mushroomed. The compassion that we showed for men who hit women was what the key to our success was. That was the essence of the women's movement. It was a teaching each other in a consciousness-raising way. And fortunately for men, it was the essence of the Batterers program. Mm-hmm. Because men, for the first time, sat in a group and discussed their childhoods and where it all began. No one should have to experience that level of violence in their home, in the place that's supposed we go to for comfort and safety. That's supposed to be where we go, where you can never do anything wrong. Everyone's going to love you no matter what.
I mean, this was women helping women. And what we would always say, the difference between me and a battered woman is a fist. I was very lucky that I didn't have to undergo anything like that. I'll tell you, it was the most exciting period of my life. I mean that, because you had an idea, you were able to make it happen, you had a lot of support from people in family and also from the other organizations because they really believed in what we were doing. It was really great.
People were taking care of each other. They formed friendships. We all cooked together. The people you would never expect showed up at the shelter, right? It was an amazing, amazing experience.
The whole thing was really outside of mainstream ideas. And people were there because they wanted to be there. I mean, it had to do with their ethics, their sense of community, sense of self. So, this is, peace and love, right?
For years afterwards, I would sometimes be somewhere. I went through the pay booth of the Rhinebeck Bridge, and the man who gave me my ticket, remember I used to pay money to go, he looked at me and he said, "Remember who I am? I was in the group. Thank you for my life." I was in the hospital and I was in the cafeteria getting something, and the woman who served me my hot dish, this was 25 years later, told me she remembered, she told me her children, everyone would say, "I'm fine. It's all right. I'm fine."
All started with a phone call to family. People look at my career and I talk about it a lot, about my trajectory, but at the end of the day, it started with that phone call.